Assistive technology is specifically for people with disabilities that the normal doesn't quite work for them. Okay, we've already recognized that they have disabilities, and now is there technology that we can use to help overcome those disabilities? And so I'm going to kind of talk through a few things. Over the years, I'm going to go back to Macintosh, the Apple computers. The Macintosh came out about 1984. And it was recognized, well, first of all, the big thing there was the mode that you gave input to a computer. There was a big thing that changed in 1984. And that was the fact that you were using a mouse. Everything up until that time had to come from a keyboard. But the fact that a mouse was put on there changed things. Along with that, prior to that, everything was just typed in. You had none of this going on up here. You had no drop-down menus. It was literally just type on a black screen, and really bad time was green letters showed up. Okay? And literally in Microsoft Word at the time, you could not see underlining on your screen. You could not see boldface on your screen. If you wanted to copy a file, you literally had to type in the command, copy A, drive A, the name of the file, space, B, to copy a file. And you better get it right with the typing. But now the Macintosh comes along, got the mouse on there, you can go up to File, come down, Save, let go. Easy. Copy a file, drag it from here, drop it over there. But at that point in time, this is what's called, up until then it was with you. What you see is what you get. You didn't get that in your typing. As I mentioned, you didn't see the boldface. But this graphical user interface, the fact that you used a mouse and you could see what you needed, the Windows environment, Microsoft did not invent Windows. There was a bumper sticker one time that Windows 95 is really Macintosh 84 because it came out a long time before that. But with that Windows environment, dragging and dropping, using the mouse, two disabilities were negatively impacted by that. The fact that they were not using the keyboard anymore. Can you guess what those two disabilities are? One is related to the mouse. What does it take to move a mouse? You've got to have some finger coordination, some fine motor control. Okay? So people with physical disabilities had a problem with the mouse. What's the other disability? People with visual disabilities. I've got to move that mouse and get an arrow to a particular place on my screen. Okay? If you can't see the screen, that's a very difficult thing to do. Prior to that, people with physical disabilities were using the keyboard. They were using, people with visual disabilities were hearing their computer, but they always knew where they were because they were always on a line. Okay, so those two disabilities were negatively impacted. When the first Macintosh came out, they did build in some accessibility capability. They did have screen magnification so that somebody with a mild visual disability could increase the magnification, but it's not going to take care of somebody who is blind. Okay, that did not work. For physical disabilities, for instance, with so the ease of access, and then, or on the control panel, ease of access, there's different ways for you to be able to accommodate people with mild disabilities. This is not going to take care of somebody who's blind. This is not going to take care of somebody who has total paraplegia, quadriplegia, But there are some minimal things in here. And so speech recognition, basically what's going to happen with that is the computer is, as you're speaking into it, we saw an example of that in the video of the 10th grade girl at the beginning who had the microphone next to her. As she was saying things, the computer was converting that into text so that she could just speak and it would do the typing for her. There's also the capability to have menus controlled by voice as well. It's not 100% accurate because we don't all say the same words the same way. And so it has improved over the years, but it wasn't always very good. And in fact, 20 years ago, it would have cost you $2,000 just for the program that would allow that to actually happen, whereas now it's built in. I haven't done a whole lot with it, so I'm not going to comment on the quality of it. But some of the things that we talked about on Thursday that I did mention is that there is this capability, and I'm just going to kind of step down through these. I mentioned them, but I'll mention them again. Turning on mouse keys. What that does is it converts your numeric keypad into being a mouse. Now, if you've got a laptop, you don't have the numeric keypad. There is the capability to buy a separate numeric keypad if this is something that you need, but it's going to be more likely somebody who's using a full-on keyboard like I've got over here. And so the different numeric keys actually control the mouse itself. And you would just literally click on that and it's good to go. Sticky keys, what this one does, I think I mentioned, but I'll mention again, is if you need to do a capital letter but you can only use one finger, turning sticky keys on allows you to hit with the one finger the shift key, then the letter that you need, and it'll type that letter. If you needed the exclamation point, again, one finger, hitting the shift key, and then hitting the number 1 to get that exclamation point. Toggle keys, what this one does is it lets you know if you've accidentally hit the numlock key or the caps lock key, something that I tend to do a lot of times. And literally you'll hear a sound to let you know that you've hit that key. And then filter keys, this one, for somebody who's got cerebral palsy, they're going to have a lot of spastic motion, a lot of extra motion. And what filter keys does is it requires a key to be pressed for a certain amount of time before it's actually recognized as being a keystroke.
Always scan this section.
Magnifier, that will magnify the screen. Let's see if I can.
Start magnifier.
Okay. I'll have to figure out how to turn that off. I don't know how I turned it on. But this
Start narrator.
This is magnified.
Start on screen keyboard. Set up high contrast.
I know how to make it stop.
Start.
Mute. There we go. More than one way. With this one, we've got screen magnifier on, and it's doubling the screen, multiplying it by 2. However, it gets a little bit weird trying to figure out where on the screen am I, because as the mouse moves, it's the screen behind it that's moving around. And so it can get a little bit confusing. You can increase the magnification. I've got it up to 9 times its normal size. But what do you think's the problem now? Where the heck on the screen am I? Okay? That becomes a little bit of a problem. So you can move around, but that really, it does not give you a very good idea of where you are in the screen itself. So again, it's not going to be a total cure for all situations. The high contrast, I'm going to guess on this one, but I think I'm probably right. That one is going to allow you to switch. Right now we've got white background, black writing, but we could switch it so that you've got black background with white writing. For some individuals, that's going to be easier for them to read, kind of thing. Hope that turned it on. But I'm going to go in for just a second. We went into change how the keyboard works, but you can also change how the mouse works as well, how it moves around. And there's a couple of other control panels in there too. Turning on mouse keys, same one we just saw a minute ago. With the mouse, even if you don't have a disability, there's some things that you might want to do with the mouse, and that is controlling how much does it move, how much does the arrow move based on how much the mouse itself moves. I've had some computers where it was really slow to move across the screen, and you can increase that speed. See if there's anything else here we need to... Yeah, you may want to control how much the mouse does or doesn't do, kinds of things. I'm unmuting just to see if it's still running in the background. So, those are some things that are built in that are there. I will mention, and I haven't used the current Macintosh to know for certain, but one of the, as you saw with the magnification here, part of the problem once you magnify up, say 400 times, 400%, is figuring out where on the screen are you in that process. On the Macintosh side, the one that they created, what you would actually see is a square. If you were in normal magnification, single magnification, 100%, you would see a square on there, and then if you did a keystroke, it would do the magnification, but it would magnify the area where the square was, so you could tell where on the big screen you were. You might not be able to read it all, but you could tell where you were. Keystroke, turn on the magnification, magnify that area that the square was in. So it was a little bit better. And so, picking up where we left off, things there to slightly accommodate mild disabilities, but there's not a whole lot. And so, and just a kind of a historical perspective, Microsoft, even through Windows 95, remember the Mac came out in 84? They were building these things in 84. In 95, when Windows came out, they did not have these capabilities built in. In 1998, Microsoft was coming out with a new version of Windows, and again, they were planning on, their basic thought was, if you've got a disability, too bad, your problem, not mine. And literally, they were going to get sued. Things in special education, rights for people with disabilities, that came through legislation. You know, the things got changed. Sticky keys, I'll mention that one. If you need to type a capital key, what are you going to do? Takes 2 fingers. Okay? You can only do it with one. It's possible. Caps, lock, and then P. That will work. Now you need an exclamation point, which is the shifted 1. You can only use one hand. Now, my way of doing it is the thumb and the finger. But let's go, you can only use one finger. Okay? Caps lock works for letters, it does not work for the other characters. So you're not going to get that. Sticky keys, there's a setting in there that you turn this on, and literally what it means is keys that are used with something else. your control key, your alt key, your delete key, the shift key. If that's turned on, I can go shift P, shift 1, using one finger. And literally you can restart a Dell computer, control, alt, delete with one finger, even though everything's at opposite ends of the keyboard. So that's sticky keys. Toggle keys is the one that I was telling you about that turns on, makes noise whenever you hit the caps lock key. Filter keys. We'll find out who we got in here, special ed majors. You've already learned everything you need to know about special ed, right? So my question to you is, people with cerebral palsy have certain characteristics about them. Any guess what some of those characteristics are? The most common one. Shake. Parkinson's disease. There's a lot of others. Okay? If I'm shaking like this, and I get close to a keyboard, I'm going to hit more keys than I wanted to hit. Okay? What filter keys does is it requires a key to be pressed for an extended period of time before it's recognized as a keystroke, filtering out the excess motions, kind of thing. Some other things built in: magnifier, again, turning that up, narrator, reading the screen to you, kinds of things. These are all built-in activities. Another one that I saw there a while ago, but I'm not seeing right now, is you'll find that some people, the white background with black letters is hard to read, but if you turn it around, make it a black background with white letters, it may be easier for them to read. Some color combinations are good, some are bad, kind of thing. But these are all things that are built into the computer. And so, but it doesn't take care of situations where you've got a severe physical disability or severe visual disabilities. So that means you got to kind of step outside. Taking a look at your keyboard. Any idea why the keys are where they are? This is called the QWERTY keyboard, Q-W-E-R-T-Y, because if you go across the top row of letters, Q-W-E-R-T-Y. But any guess why those letters are where they are?
Is it like the most common, I think of like letter combinations or where your hands fall?
So the most common, so the bottom line is that's going to help us be what? Faster. Make us go faster. Wrong. This keyboard, and this is not a pick on you, this keyboard was actually designed to slow you down. Did you ever get hold of one of the original typewriters that had arms that came up and struck the ribbon? Oh, you're missing out on something. It is a lot of fun. Because literally you get your fingers on there and you start hitting a bunch of keys, and you get, if you get 3 of those up there at one time, it jams up. So now you got to take your fingers off of the keyboard, reach up, pull them back so that they all go back into their proper place. And so the QWERTY keyboard was designed to slow you down so that the keys that are used most often are left hand and require the same finger. Okay? What's a good typing speed with a QWERTY keyboard? If you could be a good typist, what do you think your speed might be? 90 is good. 90's flying. 90's flying. You know, most of us are going to be probably in the 30 to 50, unless you've had a lot of training and so forth. Mine's going to be somewhere under 30 with a very high percentage of mistakes, because I never took typing anywhere or keyboarding anywhere. But the problem is, well, let's go with, anybody have any idea what the fastest Guinness Book of World Records speed is? It's somewhere between 150 and 200 sustained for 30 minutes. Flying, over the keyboard. But it was not done with a QWERTY keyboard. It was done with something called a Dvorak keyboard. And this is what the keys look like on a Dvorak keyboard. The basic philosophy here is that most words in English are consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. Consonants on this side, vowels on this side. So you're going back and forth. Rather than the QWERTY that's putting most of your typing on your left hand, assuming people are right-handed. Okay? The first Macintosh or Apple IIc that came out in 1983 was able to do the Dvorak keyboard. All you had to do is go into the control panel, change it from QWERTY to Dvorak, and then literally you plucked the keys off and switched them around so it looked like this. And since 1983, 1984, we have been able to do the Dvorak keyboard. How many of you have ever heard of the Dvorak keyboard? It makes sense. 200 words a minute as opposed to 90. It makes sense. If you know 2 languages, what do we call you? Bilingual. You know more than 2, 3, 4, 5, what do we call you? Multilingual. If you know 1, what do we call you? American. We're pretty obnoxious. We expect the rest of the world to do what we want done. Over the years, there's been major attempts to do the metric system. We know it's the right thing to do. Literally, my car has both American and metric stuff on it. Came from the factory that way. Depended on where the parts were made, which one it was going to be. So you got to have 2 sets of tools to work on. We know it's the right thing to do. We're just not going to do it because that means we got to learn something different. And we're not going there. As Americans, we're not going there. So, but there are, and just if you wanted to know, Barbara Blackburn is the person who has the world record for typing. Alternatives for the keyboard. And literally, I was playing around with this. I literally took an old website, put it into Google Sites today. So I'm not going to guarantee this works. But we'll find out. Alternatives for the keyboard is other ways of giving the computer input. In the past, we used to teach the terms input and output. Input, you're giving information to the computer. Output, it's giving information back to you. In this case, IntelliKeys is a device that's about this big and somewhere in a cabinet. I've actually got one, but it's about this big. And what you do, notice this keyboard, A, B, C, D, E. Any guess who you might be using that keyboard for? Little kids who are just learning their alphabet at the same time. Imagine learning your alphabet and then get in front of a QWERTY keyboard. That makes no sense whatsoever anyways. But with this, there is a sheet that slips into this device, and on the back of it's a little, kind of like your credit card with the magnetic tape. It reads that tape and realizes, okay, this is what's going on. But basically, it's a small version of a touchscreen, like your smartphone. And so you can slip different ones in and out. If you have somebody with a severe physical or mental disability, you literally start off by teaching them cause and effect. You're not teaching them letters. You're teaching them if you do this, that happens. And so what's the first word that most kids learn? How many of you are parents? None of you. Okay? You'll find out when you're a parent what the first word your kid learns. Typically it's no. Okay, that's the first word they learn. Or if you use vulgar terms, that's usually particularly, not talking from experience, but usually no. And so some of the words that you start by teaching are yes and no, understanding the difference between yes and no. And so there's a possibility of splitting this in half, making one side yes, one side no. So for somebody who's just learning at the beginning, they're able to press whichever one is which. And so we're out of time, so. We were in alternatives for the keyboard, and I had already talked about the IntelliKeys, and if anybody wants to see that device somewhere, I think it's in the closet outside, and I'd have to find a key to get to it, but I do have one of those. And I have not checked all of these links to see if they're going to work, so we'll see how well it goes. This particular keyboard is set up for somebody who can only use one hand. And literally you'd buy either a left-hand one or a right-hand one. They are set up differently. Notice what the price tag is. $479 for this one. That keyboard that I've got over here, any guess how much that costs? Somewhere between 15 and 20. Okay? The reason that they're so radically different, how many Dell keyboards do you suppose have been made? Millions, possibly billions. Whereas with that, it's probably in the low thousands. Okay? When you create something, you develop something, there's research and development costs that go into making that item, and then the cost of that research and development is spread over the number of units that you sell. There's so many more of those sold that that's why they're cheap, but not everybody needs that one-handed keyboard. And so you're going to see that some of the prices on these items are just huge. And I'm not going into all of them. This one, $99 for this one, but literally the difference being that the Braille characters are on there. And so that you know, I'm always interested to see, is the smart board going to do what I expect it to do? Let's see if it does. Braille looks like that. There's the possibility of 6 dots being raised on the paper. And literally, if you've never seen Braille paper, it's a lot thicker, much like cardstock, as opposed to the thin paper that we're using. And a Braille printer literally is pounding that paper to raise those dots up. And most times when you've got a Braille printer, they literally put it in a soundproof case just because it's that noisy. We used to have one, but it's on loan to West Ashley High School because they've got a visual impairments classroom out there, and we loaned it to them rather than have it sitting here doing nothing in the process. But as I said, Braille is the possibility of 6 letters or 6 dots being raised, and just to let you know, the other 3 dots would have been there. We'll test your knowledge here. Anybody know what Braille letter that is? 3 dots on the left raised. Or a guess?
I said W.
It's not W, to my knowledge. It is the letter L. However, it's not because it looks like an L. None of this is because it looks like the real thing. I don't know how Braille, who invented this, figured out which is which, but this is literally the only Braille letter that I know. Because we used to have something, I'm going to show you here in a little bit, called the Braille notebook. It was a notebook computer. It was about 4 inches tall, 6 inches wide, and Braille keyboard. You'll see that in a minute. But if I want to use keystrokes to tell my computer to print, anybody know what the keystrokes are to do that? Command P or Control P, depending on which brand you've got. Well, on a Braille keyboard, there is no Command key, there is no Control key, and so literally to do, and I'm going back to a notebook computer back in the 90s, to do that, I needed the Command L, and literally, you'll see the keyboard in a minute, but holding the space bar down while you type the letter gave it a command. The command was to go to the top of page. To operate that computer, you had to use keystrokes to make it happen. And so that's the only one I remember. You'd be typing something in, and then you'd want to go back to the beginning of the document. It was the Command L to go to the top of page.
Smart work, yay.
It's always interesting to see what effect I'm going to get. Okay, so this one, you can see the raised dots on the keyboard itself, forming whatever the letter or character might be. And just some more useless knowledge for you. There's actually 2 kinds of Braille, grade 1 and grade 2. Grade 1 Braille, there is a character-for-character relationship. The letter A has a Braille character. The letter B has a Braille character. But literally, if you took, anybody got a textbook with them? Any textbook? I'm going to estimate that a Braille version of this textbook, see how thick it is? A Braille version will be about like that and probably take about 2 volumes in order to have the information that's in this one. Okay? Because of the size of the letters, you've got to have enough spread out, but also because of the thickness of the paper and the fact that those raised dots are lifting up on that paper. So, I mean, they just get to be huge. So, grade 2 Braille, if I want to do the words cannot in the smallest form that I can, what am I going to do? Least number of characters. You know the answer. Pardon me? Contraction. All right, C-A-N apostrophe T. Well, grade 2 Braille is like that. But you have to be a whole lot more intelligent, be able to store a whole lot more information yourself to know grade 2 Braille, which I do not know. Grade 1, the best I could do is have a printed copy and a Braille copy and try to cross-reference myself. I never did a whole lot with Braille, so. Which brings me to the Braille note computers. We got a new batch. Yeah. These are not like any I've seen. Well, let me talk about what you got in front of you. I'm going to assume, and it is totally an assumption based on a modicum of intelligence and experience, that this is a touch screen and that you'd be doing the Braille up there, but I'm going to look for another Braille computer in just a minute. But let me talk about what's going on here. This is what's called refreshable Braille. I mentioned that Braille is the possibility of 6 dots being raised. And what this refreshable Braille does is right now it's all flat across there, but refreshable Braille, as you're reading down through a paragraph, if you're on line 1, the Braille version of line 1 would come up there because somebody who's reading Braille needs to be able to feel it. And so literally those dots are going to raise up from the bottom there. But I'm assuming that there's going to be some sort of Braille keyboard on there. But yeah, the price, kind of amazing. You know, 4,000. Oh, we got a cheap one over here. Got a new batch of them out, so I'm going to talk about the one I used to use, the keyboard on the one I used to use. Look like so. And you guess why it looks that way? And you can ignore the bottom key, literally 7 keys. If I wanted to type Braille letter L that I just showed you, what would I do? Press the 3 on the left-hand side. So literally, it was the 3 and 3 kind of thing. But those that came up, that's totally new for me. I haven't seen those before. This one, I'm not sure what that one does. Looks like it's not going to do anything anyway. Okay, so that's some the Braille note computers. The Braille note computers, they were just the ones that I used were just note takers. That's all they did. They didn't access the internet. I'm going to guess these newer ones, especially at that price, I would hope that they do more than that. I had a grant. This would have been about 15 years ago. There are federal laws that any institution who receives federal money, which the College of Charleston does, that those institutions have to provide the same information to all of their students at the same time. So that if I had a blind student in this classroom, I would have to give them the same information I'm giving you in a format that they can deal with at the same time. And back then, there was really not a whole lot of Braille information out there for students. So, for instance, if there was a textbook, they would need to have the Braille version of that textbook on the same day that you get the regular version of the textbook. Federal law, and you can lose money. And so I wrote a grant that brought that Braille printer in that I mentioned, and I emailed all the faculty at the College of Charleston and said, if you need information printed in Braille, let me know. We can help process that. The process was give it to me in a word processor, and I can convert it and print it out in Braille. And literally, I had no requests for that, even though there were 2 blind students at the college at the time. One of those students did contact me, and he told me that what he was doing was he was getting that information, but he was getting in a Word version. But how else besides Braille could a blind person actually be able to read that Word version? What would have to happen?
We'd have to listen to it.
They listen to it. Okay? And so there's something called screen readers that literally read the text out loud, most of the time in a computerized voice. So those are some of the alternatives for the keyboard. Alternatives for the mouse. And again, I'm going to kind of jump around. First off, IntelliKeys is in this list. Remember the IntelliKeys keyboard that I showed you? back to that other one for just a second. If this link did work. Literally what you would do is turn this keyboard into being the mouse. That layout that you see there, the A, B, C, D, E keyboard, that would slip out and you'd put another one in that was the mouse movements. Up, down, left, right, diagonal, kind of thing. You're just reprogramming the device. This one, using your finger on the board itself, touchpad. We've had a variety. Anybody ever use a wireless mouse? Okay. I use the wheel a lot in the middle to scroll up and down. But there's others. We had one a few years ago, and literally it was your thumb would, there was a ball on it, and you would roll the ball around with your thumb, and that would move the mouse around. Mouse click would be on your finger, but the ball itself. And I literally had somebody in class that we got that for because she was not able to move the mouse itself around. So physical disabilities are going to run into problems with the mouse. This we saw some reference to in the video. With some people, and again we're dealing with physical disabilities here. Does anybody remember who Christopher Reeves was? He was Superman, one of the Supermen. However, he had an accident, horseback riding, and he was paralyzed from the neck down. But he wanted to be able to operate his own wheelchair. He couldn't use his hand on a joystick kind of thing, like we've seen some of the video. Anybody know how he operated his wheelchair? Literally, there was a tube that came up next to his mouth, and it would operate a switch. The tube and the switch, it was called a sip and puff. With puff, any guess what he was doing? Breathing into it. With sip, any guess what he was doing? Sucking on it. That would control two different switches. And he could use that. One, and I don't know which, might have been which, but one would have controlled the steering, one would have controlled the movement. But he literally could do that. There are some individuals that's how they type, with that kind of a switch. And we saw an indication of that in the video itself. There was one boy who was working with a communication device, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. But with that device, he would hit a switch, and the QWERTY keyboard is not the perfect one for this, but it's the only one that I got a quick example of up here. But he would hit a switch, and this whole row, first row, would highlight. He'd hit the switch again, or sometimes it's controlled by him hitting the switch. With some individuals, it's automatically going to go to the next line. Depends on what muscle group the student has access to. Some of the ones that I've worked with in the past, they would highlight the row. If you didn't do anything, it would move on down to the next row. Didn't do anything, it would move down to the next row. If what you wanted was on the row that was highlighted, it would then move through groups of 3. And so, using that as an example, if I were going to type my name, I'm going to ignore the number row here for a minute. If I were going to type my name, the QWERTY line would light up. My letter's not there. The ASD line would light up. My letter's not there. The ZXC line would light up. My letter is there. So then this group of 3 would light up, mine's not there. This group of 3 would light up, mine is there, I'm hitting my switch. The B would light up, that's not what I want. The D would light up, that is what I want, I hit my switch. And so literally, I'd have to wait for it to scan to the one row I wanted, hit the switch, the group of letters that I wanted, hit the switch, then the letter that I wanted, hit the switch. And it's taking 3 switch presses to do that. That's for somebody who's first learning how to do this. And as I said, the QWERTY keyboard is not going to be the one you would want to use to do that. There was actually an ETA keyboard because the first row and the first 3 letters were the ones that are used the most. So they would take the least amount of keystrokes to get to. Okay? If you've got somebody who's really good, they can use 2 switches to do this, and 1 switch to move through, the other switch to make your selection, kind of thing. But you're not going to use the same switch. You're not going to use the same setup for every individual. Can you tell me, we saw at least 2 switches in the video. Can you tell me of a switch you saw? There was at least 2. Might have been more, but I can remember 2. One is called Big Red. Does that prompt you at all? Guess what color it is? Red. There was a boy in a wheelchair, and next to his head was Big Red. There was a switch there, and all he had to do was turn his head to hit that switch to make his choice. The other one, because this being able to turn your head, that's a good thing. And let me kind of back up for just a second. We're talking about physical disabilities here. So if I can't use my hands, what's the next best option? Good choice, but what's most like your hands? Your feet. Okay, so if you can't use your hands, unfortunately, the likelihood of that being the case, slim to none, because if it's done because of paralysis, it's usually from a point down and everything below. Your feet are below your hands, so that's not always going to be the case. But if you do have capability to control your feet, they are the second best. I'm going to tell you about a video I saw way back when I was doing my master's in special ed, which was back in the mid-'80s. And this was a lady and literally had no arms. I don't know, it was birth defect or whatever, but she did not have any arms. And they showed her grocery shopping. And she was in the produce section and wanted to take a look at the apples. And so literally she was using her body to push the cart around, but literally she would slip her shoe off, brought her foot up, picked an apple up out of the bin, looked at it, and said, okay, yeah, that's the one I want, and, with her foot, put it in the cart. Nowadays, we look at that and say, ew. But then we were like, wow, that's amazing. Times change. But your hands are the best thing you can use for physical manipulation of things. Your feet next best, but if you don't have either, then you're moving on to the switches. And you're going to take advantage of anything, any group of muscles that deviates from the norm the least. And so Big Red allowed that boy to turn his head and hit it. It's just a matter of where do you place Big Red. But there was another boy in there, and they tried and tried and tried to find a little muscle group that he had control of. And the only muscle group they found was his brow. Being able to furrow his brow, just wrinkle it up. And the switch that they had on him was a headband that felt the pressure when he furrowed his brow. When you furrow your brow, it's lifting out a little bit. And it would put enough pressure on that switch that that's how he controlled things. That's not the optimal thing. Can you imagine that scanning process that I told you with the keyboard here, and you are having to furrow your brow to get through 3 keystrokes per letter to get there? It's not going to be fast, but it does give you the capability to type or to control things. And so there's literally all kinds of switches out there. Back in the 80s, we were trying to make our own. Anybody ever see a non-digital thermostat for the furnace air conditioner? Non-digital? Ever take the cover off of it? See what was underneath? Well, let me tell you, because I have. Inside is a coil that looks like this. And at the end of that coil is a glass tube. And in that glass tube, and guess? Mercury. And so there were 2 electrical leads here. And so with that coil, it's sensitive to room temperature. When heat goes up, what do we know?
The coil moves when it touches.
It expands. And so what would happen is the coil and just assume this is expansion. The coil would go here, and the mercury would end up at this end. And it would make the connection right there. And so literally, the coil contracting and expanding is causing the mercury to go to the opposite ends of that glass tube. Turning it on, turning it off. And so what we did back in the day is we would take that glass tube, the electrical leads that came off of it, and use that as a switch. You could take that glass tube, put it on somebody's finger, and just raising the finger up and down. So the switch is, what does the switch do? Literally it turns it on and turns it off. That's all the switch does. It's either on or off. And so the kind of switch that you use, you're going to take advantage of whatever that individual has control over. And so there's a lot of variety in switches out there. And as I mentioned with that one boy with the furrowing of the brow, it took them a long time to figure out what they could take advantage of with him. There's all kinds of switch kits that you can get, and so I'm not going to go into those, but there's literally some homemade, like we were doing with that, and some that you can buy. See if there's anything over here we need to. These last 2, Open Book and Kurzweil. Anybody got a scanner at home? What do you do with it? Scan stuff. Yeah. Basically, with a scanner, you put something on it, and you hit the button, and it turns that something into being a picture. Well, what you probably don't know, if you've got your own scanner, typically, you also get a little extra software with that. And that software is called optical character recognition. OCR. With OCR, usually there's extra software. Yes, the scanner scans stuff, turns it into picture. You can plop that into a Word document, PowerPoint slides, whatever. But what optical character recognition does is it then does another step and tries to see, does it recognize words that are in whatever it is you scan. So literally you lay a book page on there and you do the optical character recognition, it's going to try and see, are there words in there, and then convert that picture into being a Word document. So we can scan that. What these two devices do, OpenBook and Kurzweil, is they'll then take it one step further. Once it's in optical character recognition, they converted what was a picture into being text, a Word document with words. It will then read that out loud using speech or text-to-speech software. Literally looking for words in that text. Kurzweil and OpenBook, they build that three-step all into one process. So literally, with that, you can lay the book on it and have it read the book to you, which is a neat process. And they used to, I don't know if they still do, but they used to have a Kurzweil at the library that students could use. This is a neat feature with the smart board. With the eraser, I could go like a teacher does, but if you do the eraser and circle around, and then hit the eraser in the middle, it erases whatever you put on the smart board, whatever's inside the circle that you drew. So anyway, those two devices are out there. And then the last group that I wanted to go into, this is augmentative communication. This is for individuals who are not able to speak for themselves. And there's a whole variety of devices here. Which we may or may not get to see. And we saw a couple of examples of this in the video with these two. These look like they're we'll go with this first. These look to be like apps for iPads or iPhones. The nice thing is, if it fits on an iPad, it'll also work on an iPhone as well. But in this case, we've only got 12 possible choices here. Literally, and I'm speculating just based on my knowledge of previous devices. I don't know this particular device. But literally, the person who's working with the individual who can't speak, under each of those 12 boxes, they're going to store some audio. So think, if you will, that you're an individual and every Wednesday your caregiver takes you out to McDonald's and you get your favorite meal. It's a Coke, large fry, and a cheeseburger. And so literally under one of those squares would be a recording, if it's pressed, a recording of probably the caregiver saying, I'd like to have a large Coke, large fry, and a cheeseburger. Or it might be that they're under three. The large Coke under one button, fries under another, cheeseburger under the third one. Okay? So, and the reason that I'm speculating this is based on the fact there's only 12 buttons that I could possibly press. Because that indicates it's a fairly limited vocabulary on the part of the individual. It will get more complicated. If you take a look at the right-hand side, we've got larger keyboards with a lot more possible buttons under there. But that's my speculation. But let's go with that first one first. If I take that device, I cannot speak for myself, and I go into McDonald's, and I press the button to order my large Big Mac, my fries, and a small Coke, and the person working there said, sorry, we ran out of Coke. Where are you? Unless you've got another button with another choice, you're not able to communicate your needs at that point in time. So it's fairly limited. Okay? You're limited by the number of buttons that you've got to work with. you're limited by the amount of stored speech that's in there. Let's see what this looks like. Okay, with these, we got a whole lot more possible buttons underneath, and I can't get a good look at this, but that gives me a whole lot more choices of stored information. What do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 49 possible stored pieces of speech in there. And then when you get somebody whose intellectual level is increased beyond that, one of the things that they've done in the past is there would be one button that would literally switch between screens. So it could be 49 times, let's say you've got 7 different possible screens, increasing the number of possible stored things. But that's still going to be fairly limiting. And I'm going to speculate just because I can't see on the screen itself. But it looks like right here, that looks like an area that would recognize typing. There's 2 kinds of speech that you can get out of a machine like this. One is where the speech is recorded. You've recorded somebody's voice. The problem with that is you're limited to how many recordings you've done, and recorded speech takes a lot of a memory, but that's probably not a problem anymore. But it doesn't deal with those spur-of-the-moment spur-of-the-moment things where you need to be able to do something that hasn't been pre-planned. I've seen devices, but as I said, I can't see this one well enough to know. I've seen devices where there was stored information, but as well, there was also an alphabet keyboard on there too. So you'd have a picture representing something, so that might be my Big Mac, but I could also switch it and have that be the A, and so that I could do typing. And that is going to be text-to-speech as well, where you're typing the text in and then having the device speak it back. One of the problems with these devices, unfortunately, most of the individuals who can't speak for themselves, it's due to something beyond just a speech deficit. Usually there's physical disability go along with that, and sometimes mental disability as well. And so you'll get somebody that's got multiple disabilities to have to deal with. But that is augmentative speech. One area, and we actually saw a slight indication of it there, one area that's really opened up quite a bit is literally right there. Apps for the iPad or Chromebooks or Androids. That's really made a lot more available for individuals. When you have a specialized device, like the Diavox over here, let's see what I was looking to see if there's a price tag on those. Some of these devices get in the $10,000 range. But if you can put it on something that everybody has, an iPad, a Chromebook, an Android phone, then the price comes down quite a bit. For software, this is changing all the time. These are some companies that in the past have dealt with situations. I'm going to go back to my experience with teaching special ed. I taught mental disabilities, and basically as much as possible, I would adapt regular ed materials for my special ed classroom, just because it was going to be a whole lot cheaper. In 1983, My budget for the school year for my special ed classroom was $15. I bought paper and pencils because I couldn't rely on my students having paper and pencils to bring to my classroom. So you have to, and again, I was in a rural West Virginia school. When you look at, we saw some hardware prices, you know, $400 versus $18 for a keyboard kind of thing. The same thing happens with software too. It might be a $15 program for a regular ed class, but if it's specifically for special education, it's going to be a $450 program kind of thing. So, you know, the same kinds of limitations exist. I tell you all of this about assistive technology, not because I want you to be an expert. I am not an expert, and I've been dabbling in assistive technology for almost 30 years now. I am not an expert. The technology changes, and unless you're using it every day and working with it every day, as you can see, the only thing I remembered out of Braille was the letter L. Okay? Unless you're doing it every day, you are not going to be an expert. My purpose in bringing this into this classroom is you're going to have students with disabilities in your classroom. You need to have an idea of what's out there. You don't need to know brand names. You don't need to know what device Junior needs. You need to know that there is assistive technology out there, and you need to connect your student up with the proper people. The school district's going to have occupational therapists, speech therapists, physical therapists in there. They're the ones who are going to make the determination. Okay, how many of you are in special ed? Okay, something, and the rest of you need to know this too. Eventually, these poor souls are going to be involved with writing IEPs, individual education plans. And basically what that is the special ed teacher, once a student has been determined to need services from the special ed program, then a team is put together to decide what does that student need. What are their goals going to be? Those are put in the IEPs. But depending on the disability, that may mean them getting their own assistive technology too. And so if it's determined by that team that that individual needs that $10,000 communication device, the school district has to buy it. The school district has to buy it. But it's not going to be you, the regular classroom teacher, that decides that student needs the $10,000 piece of equipment. It's going to be a team decision to see whether or not that's going to happen. And typically, they're going to be trying them out on sample devices before they decide what device that individual needs, just because of the prices that you're seeing. Let's see what we got for resources. These are some of the agencies. We're not going to go into them all because you don't need to know about all of them, but some of the ones that are available to you. Some worth mentioning. Number 2, the South Carolina Assistive Technology Project. This is an organization that is running under a grant out of the the University of South Carolina Medical College. And they've got quite a bit of money. They have some devices, and they put on some workshops, and they also put together a conference in March. It's called the Assistive Technology Expo, and it's a free conference. So, I mean, if you want to know more about assistive technology, that's a good place to go. I would say, because I've attended it many, many years, I would say probably 60% of the presenters are people with disabilities who are using the devices that they're showing you about. And then there's vendors at that too. So it's a good one to go to just for more information. AbleNet's a good one to work with. Able Data. And they used to, and I don't know if they still have, the Department of Education had local assistive technology regional specialists. If you would like to be part of a listserv that gets regular information about assistive technology, shoot me an email and I'll connect you up with the person that's involved with that, because I get those emails myself. And then rather than me forwarding them to you, you can just get on that listserv yourself to get those. And I've started adding to this website, but this part is not totally fleshed out yet. But CEC, anybody know what that is? You guys in special ed will. The Council for Exceptional Children, and what they do on their website is they have the tool of the week, so you can check theirs out to get information. The next one is a link that I got, but I'm not familiar with them at all. So behavior tracking, one of the things, a lot of special ed students have behavior problems, and so you'll be learning about PBIS and different kinds of behavior management programs. They've got some information on there to have iPad or iPod tracking so that you can put data in and collect that data. So that is assistive technology.